I was born with the kind of body that demands attention. Between the natural curves and my preference for tailored, form-fitting silhouettes, the internet had affectionately labeled me the Ice Queen Mother. Whenever I went out with my roommate, she'd joke that we looked like a stepmother, taking her middle schooler for a walk. Even the stray dogs on campus seemed to stop and stare. For a little too long. Before we ever met in person, the guy I was seeing online sent me a photo. My roommate Gwen recognized him instantly. She let out a piercing scream. "Shut up, Jenny. Your mystery man is Hudson Christian. His dad is literally on the board of trustees. He's the golden boy of the university. But there's a catch. He's got this childhood friend, Daisy Vance, who's obsessed with playing the eternal toddler." Before I could even ask for details, Gwen had the student forms pulled up, giving me the full dossier on Daisy. "Look at this, Jenny. Daisy is a piece of work. She's built her whole personality around being tiny and innocent. People call her the weaponized toddler. If you two cross paths, it's going to be a clash of the titans. The ultimate femme fatale versus the world's oldest baby. I'd pay for a front row seat to that." I ran a hand through my long, dark waves, admiring my fresh manicure with a practiced indifference. "Let her play house," I said, my voice smooth. "Tomorrow when we meet, I'll make sure she understands one thing. In the face of real femininity, cute is just a consolation prize. To be honest, I have zero interest in girl hate. And I wasn't exactly looking for love. But Hudson Christian was obscenely wealthy. We've been dating online for a week without meeting. And he'd already gifted me $10,000 voluntarily. I was planning to go to Caltech for my PhD. And I was frantically saving for tuition. Hudson wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a bridge to my future. The secret to maximizing your take in a relationship like this: never be the one at fault. With a baby brain childhood friend in the mix, walking away with a cool million seems less like a dream, and more like a business plan. We agreed to meet at 2 revolutions per minute in the university hall. I happened to have an award to pick up there anyway. A minor crisis in the lab held me up, and by the time I pushed through the heavy oak doors, I was 20 minutes late. I could hear voices drifting from the back of the hall. "Hudson, where is she? Maybe she's too scared to show up." The voice was high-pitched, syrupy and cloyingly sweet. Every sentence ended with a little upward lilt, like a question from a toddler. That had to be Daisy. "Maybe she's a 300-pound catfish who's just a pro at Photoshop." Another male voice chimed in, snickering. "Stop it." Hudson's voice was low, resonant, but carried a hint of hesitation. "I've heard her voice. She sounds sophisticated." Daisy let out a soft huff. "Voices can be faked, Hudson. There are so many girls online who use filters and voice changers. I'm just worried you're being scammed. I just want to protect you." "Exactly, man. You've got to be careful these days." I chose that moment to push the door wide. Sunlight flooded in behind me, silhouetting my figure against the bright afternoon. I was wearing a charcoal gray, bandage dress that hit just above the knee, the neckline framing my collarbones perfectly. My hair fell in heavy waves over one shoulder, and my pearl earrings caught the light. As I moved, the hall went silent. A guy who had been mid-sip of his water choked, coughing violently. I scanned the room, my gaze landing on Hudson in the back row. He was even better looking than his photos. High brow bones, a sharp jawline and an air of cool detachment. Right now though, that detachment was gone. He was staring at me, his thumb frozen over his phone screen. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. I walked toward them, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing in the cavernous room. I took my time. "So sorry I'm late," I said, stopping in front of Hudson and leaning in slightly lab emergency. He looked up at me, his voice a bit raspy. "You're Jenny in the flesh." I gave him a slow, knowing smile. "What? Hi. Are you disappointed I'm not a 300-pound catfish?" The tips of Hudson's ears turned a vivid shade of red. A guy with glasses nearby theatrically clutched his chest. "Holy hell. Nice to meet you, sister-in-law. I'm Mike." I wasn't the one who said catfish. It was this idiot. He pointed shamelessly at the guy next to him, who looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. I laughed and the tension in the room broke. "Isn't that dress a little much for campus?" Acey's voice cut through the air. Sharp and brittle, she was practically glued to Hudson's side, clutching his sleeve like a security blanket. I took her in pigtails, a Peter Pan collar, a pink bow and a quilted purse. Wow, she really was leaning into the precious moments aesthetic. "Is it?" I sat down across from them, my movements deliberate and graceful. I looked her in the eye, my voice dripping with faux kindness. "Sweetie, when you have a woman's body, everything looks much, but I actually love your look. It's so retro." I paused, my eyes traveling from her pigtails down to her Mary Janes, then back up to her flat chest. "It's a shame. Really. Only a girl with a flat, childlike frame can pull off those doll dresses. On a woman like me, the buttons would probably become shrapnel." Daisy's face went from pale to beet red in 3 seconds. "Who are you calling flat?" she shrieked, her baby voice cracking into something much shriller. I widened my eyes, pulling a face more innocent than hers could ever be. "Oh honey, I was just stating a fact. You aren't upset, are you?" I forgot how sensitive children can be. "You." Daisy looked like she was about to have a full-blown tantrum. Daisy Hudson interrupted, his brow furrowed. He gently pulled his sleeve out of her grip. "Sit down. Don't make a scene." Daisy looked at him in total betrayal, her eyes instantly welling with tears. Hudson, you're taking her side. She just insulted me. I didn't insult you, I said softly, my tone incredibly sincere. I was calling you cute. Grown women envy that kind of youthfulness. Daisy, we can't all be babies forever. Daisy's lip trembled. She pointed a shaking finger at me. So you have a chest? Big deal. Big boobs, no brains. Before I could respond, the hall's PA system crackled to life with a burst of static. Then a booming male voice filled the room. And now please, join me in welcoming our top honor recipient for the National Life Sciences Competition, Jenny Young, to the stage. The room erupted in applause. Daisy's words died in the air, making her look utterly ridiculous. She stood there with her mouth open, unable to find a comeback. Since gaze stayed on me, and this time there was something more than just physical attraction. In his eyes, there was genuine intrigue. I looked up at the stage and saw Richard Christian, Hudson's father, holding a gold-embossed certificate and a medal. He was scanning the crowd. I stood up, smoothed my dress and walked to the stage. Under the gaze of 300 people that night, Hudson wired $20,000 to my account as a congratulatory gift. Just as I was starting to think this would be easy, my advisor called. Her tone was grim. She told me to get to the department office immediately. There are 5 people waiting for me, all looking like they were at a funeral. The head of the ethics committee pushed a stack of papers toward me. Jenny, we've received an anonymous tip accusing you of academic fraud. These are screenshots of your alleged chat logs. I flipped through them. It was a fake account using my photo and name, chatting with someone labeled essay ghostwriter. The messages were blunt. Payment details, prompts, deadlines. The tone was a decent imitation of mine. This isn't my account, I said, sliding the papers back. The whistleblower provided a photo of your student ID as proof of identity. My ID went missing last week. Committee had adjusted his glasses. We have to investigate. Until then, your fellowship and prize money are suspended. I didn't argue. The money wasn't the point. A fraud charge would kill my chances at Caltech. I picked up the chat logs again and turned to the 3rd page. Professor, look at the time stamp on this message. 12 p.m. last Tuesday. And at 3:10 p.m., I was on stage in the university hall, receiving an award from Richard Christian. There were 300 witnesses and a live stream. I wasn't in the back of the room hiring a ghostwriter. The professor's expression shifted. I tapped the ghostwriter's profile picture in the screenshot. And this account. They posted a selfie last night with a location tag at the South dorms. If you look at the reflection in the mirror behind them, you can clearly see a girl with pigtails and a pink bow. I turned my phone around to show them a photo of Daisy from the forum. Should I call Daisy Vance in here to clarify? Or should we just go straight to the dean? The office went silent. The professor took off his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. Jenny, we will handle this with the utmost seriousness. I stood up, my voice cold. I expect a formal apology, and I'll be pursuing a defamation claim. The moment I stepped out of the office, a text from Hudson popped up. How much will it take for you to drop this? I looked up and saw Hudson leaning against the wall at the end of the corridor. He looked uncharacteristically uncomfortable. Jenny, can we talk? He sounded hesitant. Look, our families have been close forever. Our fathers are business partners. Daisy, she's been spoiled her whole life. She has a temper, but she isn't a bad person. She's just immature. Could you just let this one go for me? He said it softly, his voice like a caress smiled. Sure, Hudson. If it's that important to you. He visibly relaxed. 5 minutes later, another $100,000 hit my account. I stared at the zeros and my anger evaporated instantly. Let it go for $100,000. I let her set my car on fire. But Daisy wasn't done. That afternoon, I returned to my dorm to find my desk stripped bare. My 3 thick research journals, the culmination of months of lab work, were gone. Where are my notes? I asked Gwen. Gwen looked sick, as she pointed toward the trash chute at the end of the hall. I walked over. My journals had been ripped to shreds, soaked in leftover ramen soup and coffee grounds, with a muddy footprint stamped on the cover. I tried to stop her, Gwen whispered, but Daisy said, she was helping you clean and thought it was just scrap paper. When I told her it wasn't, she started crying, saying she was just trying to be a good girl and ran off. I stared at the trash for a long time. Those notes contained 3 months of raw experimental data. My midterm defense was next week. Without that data, my thesis was dead. I took a photo and sent it to Hudson. No text, no accusations, just the image. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Bank notification. $20,000 memo. Don't be mad. Buy something nice. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then took my phone away and headed to the campus print shop. I pulled up my cloud drive and hit print on a fresh set of data. Gwen stared at me, jaw dropped. When did you scan those? The first day I started in the lab. I said, watching the printer were to life. Anyone in research who doesn't have a backup is asking for a disaster. Gwen was silent for a moment. Jenny, you're so cold, it's almost scary. The campus print shop smelled of hot ink, static electricity, and cheap adhesive. It was a sterile, comforting scent, far more reliable than the volatile emotions swirling through the university's social circles. As the industrial printer spat out page after page of my revised raw data, Gwen leaned against a nearby counter, her eyes wide as she watched the neat stacks pile up. You're not human, Jenny, she murmured, shaking her head. If someone destroyed Months of my work, I'd be in a fetal position on the floor calling my therapist. You didn't even blink. You just went to the cloud. In research, emotions are a variable we can't afford to let influence the outcome, I replied, my voice calm as I straightened the edges of my defense paper. Daisy wanted a reaction. If I cried, or if I went to the administration to scream about my ruined notes, she would have played the victim. She would have claimed it was an accident, that she was just trying to help clean. The university would have given her a slap on the wrist. Hudson would have defended her, and I would have looked like a hysterical bully, targeting a fragile girl. I slid the freshly bound manuscript into my leather tote. But now, I have my data, and I have $20,000 of Hudson's guilt money. From a purely financial standpoint, Daisy's little tantrum had an excellent return on investment. Gwen let out a dry laugh. You're terrifying. But what about the defense next week? The committee is going to examine every single chart. If Daisy tries to sabotage you during the presentation, are you ready? Let her try, I said softly, my fingers brushing over the smooth, cold surface of my phone. Sabotage requires intellect. Daisy only has drama. As if on cue, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Hudson. Hudson, I'm outside your dorm. Can we talk? Please, Jenny. I want to make things right. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the silence stretch before I typed a brief reply. Jenny, I'm at the library preparing for my defense. I don't have time for distractions right now. A classic push-pull. Men like Hudson, raised in environments where every whim was catered to, didn't value what came easily. By prioritizing my work over his presence, I wasn't just being practical. I was keeping him on the hook. 10 seconds later, another message arrived. Hudson, I'll wait. As long as it takes. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned to Gwen. I'm going to the quiet study room on the 3rd floor. I need to run a final check on my statistical models. If Hudson calls you, tell him I'm unreachable. You got it, boss, Gwen said, giving me a mock salute. Go secure that PhD. Leave the golden boy to stew. The library's 3rd floor was a sanctuary of high ceilings and dust motes, dancing in the afternoon light. I chose a desk by the window, spreading out my papers. My research focused on targeted drug delivery systems using modified lipid nanoparticles, a highly specialized field with massive commercial potential. It was the kind of work that required precision, the kind of work that couldn't be faked. As I worked, the hours slipped away. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the campus in shades of amber and violet. At 8 p.m., my phone screen lit up with a notification from the department's group chat. It was an announcement from the head of the life sciences department, Professor Vance. Yes, Vance. Daisy's uncle was the department head. It was a detail Gwen's dossier had highlighted, and one I had kept at the forefront of my mind. It explained why Daisy felt so untouchable on campus. The notification was an invitation to a private pre-defense dinner hosted by Professor Vance at his residence. It was an annual tradition for the top 3 candidates of the national competition. I checked the guest list attached to the email. My name was at the top. Beneath, it were 2 other students from my cohort, and at the bottom, listed as a student coordinator, was Daisy Vance. I smiled, a slow, calculated curve of my lips. She was setting the stage. She couldn't beat me academically, so she was going to use her home turf to tilt the scales. I picked up my phone and finally messaged Hudson back. Jenny, I'm done with my study session. I'm heading back to the dorm now. Hudson, I'm still here. In the parking lot. I'll walk you. When I walked out of the library, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry leaves. Hudson was leaning against his sleek black sports car, his coat collar turned up against the wind. When he saw me, his posture immediately straightened. The cool, detached golden boy looked distinctly anxious. Jenny, he said, stepping forward. He reached out as if to touch my shoulder, but hesitated, dropping his hand. I am so sorry about what happened to your journals. I don't even know what to say. Daisy was out of line. Out of line is an understatement, Hudson. I said, my voice quiet, laced with a delicate, controlled vulnerability. I didn't look angry. I looked disappointed. Those journals were my life's work for the past semester. I've spent nights sleeping on the lab floor to get that data. I know, he said quickly, his eyes reflecting genuine panic. I talked to her. I yelled at her, Jenny. I've never yelled at her before. She cried and said she didn't realize they were important, but I told her that was no excuse. I want to compensate you, whatever it takes. If 20,000 isn't enough. It's not about the money, I interrupted, looking up at him through my lashes. Though I appreciate the gesture, Hudson, money doesn't write a thesis. It doesn't restore lost hours. But more than that, I'm concerned about the future. If I'm going to be with someone, I need to know that their past isn't going to constantly sabotage my present. The phrase, if I'm going to be with someone, acted like a physical jolt to him. It was the first time I had hinted at a real relationship, and the stakes immediately crystallized in his mind. He couldn't lose me, not when I was the most striking, intelligent woman he had ever encountered, a stark contrast to the cloyingly sweet, infantile girls who usually populated his social circle. It won't, Hudson promised, his voice low and intense. He took my hand, his grip warm and firm. I swear to you, Jenny, I will keep Daisy away from you. She won't interfere with your defense, and she won't interfere with us. I'll make sure of it. There's a department dinner at Professor Vance's house tomorrow night, I said, watching his expression closely. Daisy is the student coordinator. Are you going? Hudson hesitated. My dad was invited as a board member. He wants me to attend with him. But if you don't want me there. No, I said, letting a soft smile play on my lips. I want you there. In fact, I think it's the perfect place to show everyone that we're moving forward together. A look of profound relief washed over his face. Really? You're not mad? I'm pragmatic, Hudson, I murmured, leaning in just close enough for him to catch the scent of my perfume, something expensive, dark and lingering. I don't waste time on anger when there are better things to focus on. As I walked away toward my dorm, I heard him call out my name, but I didn't turn back. I had given him just enough hope to keep him captive, and just enough anxiety to keep him compliant. The Vance residence was a sprawling Tudor-style mansion located in the wealthy enclave just north of the campus. It was the kind of house built on old money and academic tenure, filled with dark oak paneling, oil paintings of past university deans, and the heavy scent of beeswax polish. When I arrived with Hudson, the foyer was already bustling with guests. Distinguished professors in tweed jackets mingled with wealthy board members, while the 3 student honorees stood awkwardly near the grand fireplace, holding glasses of sparkling cider. I had chosen my outfit with deliberate care, a midnight blue silk wrap dress that clung elegantly to my curves without being overtly provocative, paired with simple silver stilettos and my hair pinned up in a sophisticated chignon. It was a look that commanded respect, the antithesis of the campus fashion trends. Hudson, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, kept his arm firmly around my waist. He was introducing me to various faculty members, his voice tinged with a pride that didn't go unnoticed. Ah, Jenny Young. A deep voice boomed from behind us. We turned to see Richard Christian, Hudson's father. He was a tall, imposing man, with sharp gray eyes and the same structured jawline as his son. Beside him stood Professor Vance, looking thoroughly academic with his silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Christian, I said, offering a polite, composed smile. It's an honor to meet you again in a more formal setting. The honor is mine, young lady, Richard said, his gaze appreciative as he assessed my posture. My colleagues in the department haven't stopped talking about your presentation at the national competition. They say your methodology on lipid vehicles is groundbreaking. She's a credit to the department, Professor Vance chimed in, though his smile seemed slightly strained. No doubt Daisy had already complained to him about me, though of course research is a long road. Many young minds falter before the finish line. I don't intend to falter, Professor, I said smoothly. The data is robust and the application is clear. I'm looking forward to presenting my defense next week. That's the spirit, Richard Christian said, nodding approvingly. We need more minds like yours in the industry. Hudson, you've chosen well. A woman of substance is hard to find these days. Hudson beamed, tightening his grip on my waist. I know, Dad. Oh, look who decided to show up. The high-pitched, childish voice cut through the murmurs of the room like a blunt instrument. Daisy was standing at the entrance of the parlor, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvre. She was wearing a puffy pastel pink dress with lace trim white knee-high socks, and a matching pink headband. She looked like a giant porcelain doll that had escaped from a nursery. She trotted over to us, her eyes wide and wet, her gaze darting between Hudson and his father, Uncle Richard. Hudson, she cooed, ignoring me entirely. I made these little cucumber sandwiches myself. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for the guests. It was so hard. My hands are literally shaking. She held out her hands, which indeed had a slight tremor, though it looked entirely theatrical. Thank you, Daisy, Richard said, his tone polite but notably cooler than the one he used with me. He was a businessman. He knew the difference between a high-value asset and a liability. You've done a fine job coordinating the evening. Daisy's eyes finally landed on me, and her sweet expression soured for a fraction of a second before she masked it with a pitying look. Jenny, I'm so glad you could make it, she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, syrupy register. I was so worried after what happened in the dorms. I felt so bad about those old papers I accidentally threw away. I literally couldn't sleep last night. Did you manage to find some scrap paper to write your defense on? The room fell quiet. Several nearby professors paused their conversations, their ears perking up at the mention of accidentally thrown away research papers. I didn't flinch. I let out a soft, amused chuckle that disarmed the tension. Immediately. It's sweet of you to worry, Daisy, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. But those weren't old papers. They were my complete peer-reviewed lab journals. Fortunately, I don't rely on paper alone. I'm a scientist, so I practice basic data hygiene. Everything was backed up on 3 secure servers. In fact, the department has already approved the digital logs. I paused, looking her up and down with a clinical, detached expression. But I do appreciate your effort with the sandwiches. It's wonderful that you found a niche that suits your capabilities. Not everyone is cut out for the lab after all. A few of the younger faculty members turned away to hide their smiles. Daisy's face flushed a deep, angry red. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the silver tray. I'm the student coordinator, she hissed, her childish facade slipping for a moment. My uncle is the Daisy, Professor Vance interrupted, his voice stern. Go check on the dining room arrangements. The guests will be seating shortly. Daisy looked at her uncle in betrayal, then at Hudson, who refused to meet her. With a sharp huff that sounded like a deflating balloon, she turned on her heel and stomped toward the kitchen, her Mary Jane squeaking loudly against the hardwood floor. Well, Richard Christian said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Shall we move to the dining room? The dinner was a masterclass in social chess. I sat to the right of Richard Christian, with Hudson on my other side. Professor Vance sat at the head of the table, looking increasingly uncomfortable as his wealthy benefactor engaged me in a deep discussion about the commercial viability of my research. If the clinical trials for your lipid particles succeed, Jenny, Richard said, raising his wine glass, the patents alone would be worth tens of millions. My firm is always looking to fund university spin-offs. Have you thought about your postdoctoral plans? I've been accepted to Caltech for my PhD program, I replied, taking a delicate sip of my water. My goal is to establish my own independent research lab there. However, funding is always the primary bottleneck for new projects. Caltech is an excellent institution, Richard agreed. But don't forget your roots here. If you decide to keep a portion of your research affiliated with our university, I can personally guarantee a matching grant from the board of trustees. That is a very generous offer, Mr. Christian, I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. I will certainly keep that in mind when drafting my final proposals. Beside me, Hudson looked ecstatic. He saw this as the ultimate validation of our connection. In his eyes, I wasn't just a beautiful girlfriend, I was a prestigious asset that elevated his family's standing. Meanwhile, Daisy was relegated to serving as the coordinator, standing by the sideboard and whispering furiously with one of the catering staff. Her eyes were fixed on me, burning with a mix of envy and raw hostility. When the main course was cleared, Daisy stepped forward, holding a large, beautifully decorated glass bowl filled with colorful folded papers. Everyone, she announced, her voice regaining its high-pitched, cheerful lilt. Before we have dessert, we have a very special tradition. Since this dinner is to celebrate our top honorees, I've prepared a future fortune game. Each of our candidates has to draw a slip of paper and read the challenge or question inside. It's a fun way to show how quick-thinking our future scientists are. The older guests murmured in polite amusement. It was a classic high society icebreaker, harmless on the surface. But knowing Daisy, there was a trap waiting. She walked around the table, stopping first at the other two candidates. Their questions were standard academic fluff. What inspired you to study science? And where do you see yourself in 5 years? They answered easily, receiving polite applause. Then Daisy stopped behind my chair. Her smile was incredibly sweet, but her eyes were cold. And now for our star, Jenny, Daisy cooed, holding the bowl down to my level. Go ahead, Jenny. Pick one. Let's see what the future holds for you. I reached into the bowl, my fingers brushing against the slips of paper. I noticed that one slip was folded slightly differently. It had a small silver foil sticker on the inner fold, likely to help her identify it or ensure. I picked it. I didn't pick that one. Instead, I reached deeper, pulling out a plain, tightly folded slip from the very bottom. Daisy's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening slightly as she realized I hadn't taken the bait. I unfolded the paper. Written on it in elegant, printed calligraphy was a question. Integrity is the foundation of science. If you discovered a colleague had fabricated their data to secure a scholarship, would you report them privately or expose them publicly? It was a loaded question, designed to make me look either like a heartless snitch or a weak collaborator. Oh, what a serious question, Daisy gasped, clasping her hands together. But so important, especially since there have been so many rumors about academic honesty lately. She was trying to bring up the fake ghostwriter accusation again, hinting at it to the influential guests at the table. I looked at the paper, then looked up, my gaze locking onto Professor Vance, who was watching me intensely. It's a very simple answer, Daisy, I said, my voice smooth and resonant. In science, there is no room for compromise. If a colleague fabricates data, they aren't just lying to the university, they are putting lives at risk, especially in medical research. I would expose them publicly. Academic fraud is a cancer that must be excised immediately, regardless of who the perpetrator is or how powerful their family might be. The table went silent. The weight of my words hung in the air, a subtle but sharp warning directed straight at Daisy and her uncle. Well said, Richard Christian declared, clapping his hands together. A true scientist respects the truth above all else. The rest of the table joined in the applause. Daisy stood there, her hands trembling, her face pale. She had tried to set a trap, but I had turned it into a platform to reinforce my own integrity. As the dinner wound down, I excused myself to use the restroom. The powder room was located down a quiet hallway on the second floor. After washing my hands, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a loose strand of hair. The door behind me clicked open, and Daisy stepped inside, shutting the door firmly behind her. Her sweet, childish persona was completely gone. Her face was twisted in a snarl, her eyes red-rimmed with anger. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she hissed, stepping closer. "You think you can just walk in here, take Hudson, take his dad's money, and ruin my life?" "I didn't take anything, Daisy," I said, not turning around, watching her reflection in the mirror. "You handed it to me. Your childish games don't work on people who actually have to work for a living. You've spent your entire life using your family's influence and your fake innocent act to get what you want. But when faced with real substance, you have nothing to offer." "I have everything," she shrieked, her voice rising. "My uncle is the department head. My family is elite. You're just a nobody trying to climb the social ladder." "And yet," I murmured, turning around slowly to look her in the eye, "Hudson's father is offering me a multi-million-dollar research grant, while you are serving cucumber sandwiches. Know your place, Daisy." She gasped, her chest heaving. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on a heavy ceramic vase sitting on the vanity. For a second, I thought she was going to throw it at me. But then a dark, manic look crossed her face. She grabbed the vase, threw it hard against the tiled floor, shattering it into dozens of sharp pieces. Before I could move, she grabbed a sharp shard of ceramic, dragged it across her own forearm, drawing a thin line of blood, and let out a piercing, terrified scream. "Help! Hudson! Uncle! She's attacking me!" Within seconds, the door was burst open. Hudson was the first to enter, followed closely by Professor Vance and Richard Christian. The scene before them was carefully staged. Daisy was slumped against the wall, clutching her bleeding arm, crying hysterically. I was standing near the vanity, completely calm, my hands folded in front of me. "Daisy!" Professor Vance rushed to his niece's side, wrapping his handkerchief around her arm. "What happened? What did you do to her?" He glared up at me, his eyes full of accusation. She attacked me," Daisy sobbed, her voice trembling violently as she hid her face in her uncle's shoulder. "I came in to tell her that the dessert was ready and she started screaming at me. She said I was trying to ruin her defense, and then she grabbed the vase and threw it at me. She cut me, Hudson. She's crazy." Hudson looked at the shattered ceramic, then at Daisy's bleeding arm, and finally at me. His expression was a mix of horror, confusion, and doubt. "Jenny," he whispered, his voice shaking. Did you?" "Hudson, look at her," Professor Vance demanded, his voice trembling with rage. "This girl is a psychopath. She's physically assaulted my niece. I'm calling the campus security and the police immediately. This is expulsion. This is jail time." Richard Christian stood at the back, his brow furrowed, his sharp eyes darting between me and Daisy. He was waiting to see how I would handle this. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice. "Go ahead, Professor," I said, my voice cool and steady as ice. "Call the police. In fact, I insist upon it. Forensic science is my specialty after all." Professor Vance paused, his hand hovering over his phone. "What do you mean?" "If the police arrive, they will perform a simple analysis," I explained, stepping forward, careful not to step on the broken shards. "They will look at the blood spatter on the wall. They will look at the angle of the cut on Daisy's arm. A self-inflicted wound is easily distinguishable from an assault wound. The angle of the slice, the hesitation marks, the clean trajectory, it all points to a self-inflicted cut." I pointed to the shattered pieces on the floor. "Furthermore, they will test the broken vase for fingerprints. You'll find Daisy's prints firmly gripped around the neck of the vase, indicating she threw it down herself. My prints are nowhere near it." I was standing by the mirror the entire time. I looked at Hudson, my gaze steady and unwavering. "Hudson, you know me. Am I the type of person who loses control and throws vases? Or am I the type of person who solves problems with logic?" Hudson stared at me, his breath hitching. The panic in his eyes began to shift, replaced by a sudden chilling realization. He looked down at Daisy, who was suddenly very quiet, her sobbing drying up as she realized her plan was crumbling under the weight of basic scientific facts. "Daisy," Hudson said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "Did you do this to yourself?" "No. Hudson, no," Daisy cried, her voice turning shrill. "She's lying. She's using her science words to trick you. Uncle, tell him. She's a monster." Professor Vance looked at his niece, then at me, and finally at Richard Christian. He wasn't a fool. He knew that if the police were called and a forensic team actually looked at the scene, it would be an absolute disaster for his family. The scandal of his niece fabricating an assault to frame a top student would ruin his academic career and lose him the funding from the Christian family. Perhaps. Professor Vance cleared his throat, his face turning a pasty shade of gray. "Perhaps we don't need to involve the police just yet. It was a chaotic situation. Daisy is clearly highly emotional and in shock. We should get her arm bandaged first." No, Richard Christian's voice cut through the room like a steel blade. Stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Professor Vance. We will not sweep this under the rug, Arthur. If your niece has fabricated an assault to ruin a student's career, it is a matter of extreme gravity. My firm does not fund departments led by people who cover up criminal behavior. Professor Vance looked like he was about to faint. Richard, please, she's just a child. She didn't mean. She is 22 years old, Arthur, Richard said coldly. She is not a child. She is an adult who has shown a pattern of malicious, manipulative behavior. Hudson, take Jenny downstairs. Arthur, you and I are going to have a private conversation in your study. Hudson didn't hesitate. He grabbed my hand, his grip tight and trembling, and led me out of the powder room, leaving Daisy and her uncle to face his father's wrath. We sat in the back of Hudson's car, the engine idling quietly. The campus was dark, save for the amber glow of the streetlights. Hudson was silent for a long time, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I can't believe she did that, he whispered finally, his voice cracked with emotion. She cut herself, just to frame you. She could have ruined your entire life, Jenny. Your career, your PhD, everything. She was desperate, Hudson, I said, my voice soft, laced with a gentle, comforting tone. People like Daisy, who have never had to face reality, will do anything to maintain their illusions. When she realized she couldn't compete with me on merit, she resorted to violence. I'm so sorry, Hudson said, turning to look at me, his eyes full of pain and regret. I brought her into your life. I allowed her to get this close to you. If my dad hadn't been there. But he was, I reminded him, reaching over to place my hand over his. And you chose to believe the truth. That's what matters to me. He looked at our joined hands, then looked up at me, his expression intense. Jenny, I want to make this up to you. I know I've said that before, but I mean it. My dad, he's furious. He's going to demand that Professor Vance resign from the department board. And Daisy, she's going to be suspended, if not expelled. He paused, swallowing hard. But my dad also wants to avoid a public scandal that could affect the university's stock and our family's reputation. He asked me to ask you if there is any way we can handle this privately, without involving the police. I let out a slow, deliberate breath. This was the moment. The peak of the leverage. Hudson, she tried to frame me for a physical assault, I said, my voice carrying a heavy, sorrowful weight. If she had succeeded, I would be in a jail cell right now. My dream of going to Caltech would be dead. How do I put a price on my peace of mind? On my safety? I know, Hudson said quickly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone. My dad told me to offer you whatever you need. He's already authorized a private settlement from our family's trust. We want to fund your entire PhD program at Caltech. No matching grants, no strings attached. A direct transfer of $500,000 to your personal research fund. And he looked at me, his eyes pleading. An additional $200,000 for your personal inconvenience. To help you settle in California. Just please, Jenny, let us handle Daisy internally. I promise you, she will never ever come near you again. I stared at him, my heart rate completely steady, though my mind was rapidly running the numbers. $500,000 for research, $200,000 in cash, plus the $130,000 I had already secured. Nearly $1 million. My bridge to the future was no longer just a bridge, it was a high-speed highway, paved in gold. If I accept this, Hudson, I said, looking him deep in the eyes, it is not because of the money. It is because I trust you. I trust that you will keep your word. I will, he swore, his voice trembling with gratitude. I swear to God, Jenny, I will. He tapped a few buttons on his phone, authorizing the transfer through his family's private banking portal. A minute later, my phone buzzed in my lap. Bank notification. Incoming transfer of $700,000 from Christian Trust Services. Status completed. I looked at the screen, letting a soft, satisfied smile grace my lips. Thank you, Hudson, I murmured, leaning across the console to press a soft, lingering kiss to his cheek. You've proven that you're a man of your word. The day of my midterm defense arrived with a crisp, clear morning. The sky was a pale, unbroken blue, a perfect backdrop for the final act. The university's grand auditorium was packed with faculty members, graduate students, and a few select members of the board of trustees, including Richard Christian. Professor Vance was notably absent, having taken an unexpected medical leave of absence earlier that week. In his place sat Dr. Albright, a strict no-nonsense researcher who had taken over as the interim department head. I stood behind the podium, my charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection, my hair pulled back in a sleek, professional ponytail. My presentation slides were projected onto the massive screen behind me, showing the flawless, elegant curves of my lipid nanoparticle distribution models. For 45 minutes, my voice was the only sound in the room. I spoke with absolute confidence, guiding the audience through the complex chemistry, the statistical trials, and the revolutionary implications of our delivery system. When I finished, there was a moment of absolute, stunned silence. Then Dr. Albright stood up, a rare, genuine smile on her stern face, and began to clap. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted into a standing ovation. I looked out at the crowd, my gaze catching Hudson, who was sitting in the front row next to his father. He was clapping furiously, his eyes filled with a mix of awe and adoration. Beside him, Richard Christian nodded in deep respect, his hands clapping in a slow, dignified rhythm. I walked down from the stage, accepting the congratulations of my peers with a practiced humble grace. Absolutely brilliant, Jenny, Dr. Albright said, shaking my hand warmly. The board has already approved your defense with highest honors. Caltech is lucky to have you. Thank you, Dr. Albright, I said. I couldn't have done it without the department's support. As the crowd began to disperse, I saw a small, familiar figure standing near the exit doors. It was Daisy. She wasn't wearing her pink doll dresses anymore. She was wearing a simple, oversized gray sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy, unkempt boon. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, and her eyes were red and swollen. She was waiting for me. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. When she saw me approaching, she flinched, but she didn't run. Jenny, she whispered, her voice stripped of all its high-pitched childish pretense. It sounded flat, tired, and thoroughly defeated. Daisy, I replied, stopping a few feet away from her. I'm surprised to see you here. I thought you were banned from department events. I am, she said, looking down at her shoes. I had to get permission just to come pick up my remaining files from the student office. I'm being transferred to a small satellite campus statewide. My uncle, he's taking early retirement. She looked up at me, a flicker of her old envy flashing in her eyes before being quickly snuffed out by despair. You won. You got everything. My family's reputation, my uncle's career, Hudson, you took it all. I didn't take anything, Daisy, I said, my voice calm, devoid of malice or triumph. You destroyed yourself. You relied on a childish persona to shield you from the consequences of your actions. But the world doesn't care about cute when it's looking for competence. You tried to fight a woman with a child's toys and you lost. She stared at me, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Do you even love Hudson? Or was he just a checkbook to you? I let out a soft, low laugh, stepping closer to her, my voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. Love is a luxury for people who don't have to build their own futures, Daisy. Hudson was a very pleasant, very generous bridge. And thanks to him, and to you, my future is absolutely secure. I walked past her, not waiting for a reply, pushing open the heavy oak doors of the auditorium. The morning sun was rising over the runway at Los Angeles International Airport. The palm trees swayed gently in the warm, salty breeze, a welcome change from the chilly autumn of the East Coast. I stood by the baggage claim, my dark waves falling over the shoulders of my cream-colored trench coat. Beside me, Gwen was busy taking selfies with a "Welcome to California" sign. I still can't believe we're actually here, Gwen gasped, tucking her phone away. And in a luxury apartment in Pasadena. Jenny, how did you manage to secure a place with a private pool on a graduate student budget? Let's just say I had an excellent financial advisor. I smiled, checking my phone. There was a final message from Hudson, sent right before my flight took off. Hudson, I hope you landed safely, Jenny. I know we agreed to take some space while you settle in at Caltech, but I'm always here for you. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. Let me know when I can come visit. I didn't reply. I simply swiped left and archived the chat. He was a sweet boy, and his family's wealth had been incredibly useful. But California was a new market, filled with new opportunities, new investors, and far grander stages. My bank account was sitting at a comfortable $930,000. My PhD was fully funded, and my research lab was already being set up with state-of-the-art equipment. I looked out the massive glass windows of the terminal, watching a jet plane climb high into the bright, endless blue sky. In the face of real femininity, cute was indeed a consolation prize. But in the face of absolute ambition, the world was just a series of transactions waiting to be completed. And I had always been an excellent businesswoman.